Hey guys, thanks for coming back and joining us here at Salty Ginger Talk. Glad to have you back. So, in today's episode, we're going to focus on the fact nobody is all good and nobody is all bad. And I thought about this episode and making this episode because I watched the vice presidential debate earlier this week and I watched the reaction to it. And it was, I shouldn't say shocking, but it really hit me that most people have made up their minds on how they feel about either side, and they refuse to either see the good in the side that they don't support or the bad in the side that they do support. And both of those exist. And it just was striking to me the amount of kind of denial that I witnessed in people's reactions to the vice presidential debate. So one thing I liked about the debate is it was civil. Both candidates, Governor Walz and Senator Vance, were cordial to each other, and I think there was cordial discourse while disagreeing on points and having, trying to have at least a valid conversation or substantial conversation on issues. I thought the moderators were horrible. I thought they did a terrible job. I thought the way they framed the questions was terrible. I thought they left out multiple things that could have been asked about, and even the questions that were asked, they didn't ask them in a very intelligent way. For example, in the economy, what specifically, how are you going to get a tax bill passed to support your economic proposals? Walk me through it. You don't have the Congress on your side. Let's say Walz Harris gets elected and the Congress is Republican, or Trump Vance get elected and the Congress is Democrat. How are you going to forward your agenda? How are you going to pay for what you want to do in those instances? Like that's how you can ask those questions. And the way they asked them was very leading and it just was bad. They think they did a bad job. So with that said, I went through and made a list of people that you probably feel one particular way about, and then picked out some behaviors or things that they did or are well known for. Not, I guess, not so well known for, but things that are known that they did that don't get publicized much, to kind of show that even good people can do horrible things and horrible people can do really good things. And I think it's something that we got to keep in mind. And you've got to keep it in mind when you think about how you talk to yourself as well. It's easy to go, oh, I suck, I'm doing everything wrong, and not give yourself credit for all the good things that you do. Conversely, you can get feeling yourself a little bit and say, hey, I got it going, I look good today, I've got my life on a great track, and not recognize your shortcomings and the things you need to work on. So I think it's really important to keep in mind that nobody is all good or all bad. So with all that said, let's jump into our list here and go through these folks. And I think you may be surprised about what you find here. Mahatma Gandhi. So I think everyone knows Gandhi's name. I don't know if everyone understands what he's famous for. He was a peaceful protester in India. He was an attorney, and he led the peaceful protests in India to gain independence from Britain. So, widely regarded as a great person, a humanitarian, and that's all well and good. But he was also a pretty big racist. So he was openly derogatory and openly hostile and openly discriminatory towards darker skinned Indian people and dark skinned people from Africa. Pretty well documented that he was that way. He also was pretty sketchy around young girls. And so, Gandhi did some really good stuff and he had some really deplorable behavior. So that's our first example of someone who's widely revered throughout history, has some pretty shady things in their past. So that's number one. Next, Winston Churchill. So Winston Churchill was a leader of Britain during World War II. And most people will say if it was not for Winston Churchill, Germany's advance across Europe would have been successful. But Churchill kind of held the line at the coast and contained Germany until the United States and Russia joined the fight and eventually defeated Germany in World War II. So, did a great thing for humanity, did a great thing for people. Well, he also contributed to the Bengal famine where almost 3 million people died. There was a hurricane that destroyed the crops in India, and Churchill refused to give them food, refused to provide supplies because he was more focused on the wartime effort and said we need to divert all of those resources to the war, and we're not going to give you food. 3 million people died because of that. There's also been some rumors about him being anti-Semitic. I did research on that, and there's folks who proclaim he was anti-Semitic, and there's folks that vehemently deny that he was anti-Semitic. So I didn't put that in here, but it's worth noting that there have been accusations about him being anti-Semitic. So, great guy that did one of the, I guess a better way to say it is he is an upstanding figure in history for his contribution to the greater good in World War II. Also had some pretty dark skeletons as well. Albert Einstein. This one was surprising to me. Einstein, clearly very intelligent, well-known physicist, widely regarded as one of the most intelligent people and deepest thinkers in the history of the world. Came up with the theory of relativity that kind of proves that time travel is possible. Well, that's great, but he also had cheated on both of his wives, had a thing for young girls. He lusted after his second wife's daughter at one point, thought about marrying the wife's daughter instead of the wife. His first wife had a handicapped child at home that she raised on her own because Einstein refused to participate, moved to a different country. So even though he was a very intelligent guy and contributed greatly to science and kind of the world view on how the universe operates, he was really scummy towards the people in his life. So that was very interesting. Next, I grouped them all together because I didn't want to just list off a bunch of former presidents and or leaders of our nation when it was first fathers, right? So the founding fathers founded a nation based on freedom and independence, yet owned hundreds of slaves and allowed slavery to flourish in the southern states. You know, it's well known that Thomas Jefferson slept with several of his female slaves, impregnated them, and they bore his children. And he did not free those women. He did not free his children as slaves. So now it's worth noting, and this is very important. It's easy to look back and say, oh my gosh, that was terrible. And if I was alive then, no. If you were alive then, you would have done what everybody else was doing, just like you're doing what everybody else does now. It was wrong. It was terrible. I don't condone it in any way, shape, or form. With that said, to look back on it and apply today's social norms and values and rules to the social norms, values, and rules that existed 250 or 300 years ago is just silly. People will look back 200 years from now and things will have changed. And they'll look at us and say, well, those terrible people. That's just false in my mind. Are the things that we probably would look back on and say, I wish I'd have done that different. I wish I hadn't supported that. Or I wish I hadn't said that. Sure, of course. With all that said, it doesn't change the fact that slavery was a terrible thing. And our founding fathers not only condoned it, they actively participated in it. And I think it's important to recognize both of those things. They did great things in terms of forming what has become the most powerful and best nation that's ever existed on the face of the earth, in my opinion, while at the same time treating hundreds, if not thousands of people in their direct purview terribly as subhuman. So I thought that was a good example of Woodrow Wilson, our president during World War II. He was a huge racist, kicked black people out of the White House. He segregated the army so that white troops weren't fighting with black troops. He was a KKK sympathizer. He was an anti-Semite, couldn't stand Jewish people. So did a great job of leading the country through World War I, but also was a terrible human being as it relates to his treatment of those groups of people. So nobody's all good, nobody's all bad. These are all examples to kind of prove that point. Dr. Seuss, Green Eggs and Ham, One Fish, Two Fish, Red Fish, Blue Fish, The Lorax, The Cat in the Hat. These are classic children's books. I used to read these books to my sons all the time at bedtime when they were young. Outstanding stuff, just, absolutely great stuff. How many of those have been made into, how many Dr. Seuss books have been made into movies? 3 or 4 that I can think of right off the top of my head. He cheated on his wife and treated her so terribly that she actually killed herself. And he was not great to his wife at all. So on one hand, he's contributing to society by writing all this great entertainment and educational stuff for children that have great messages and moral messages, while at the same time treating his wife so terribly she took her own life. So Dr. Seuss was an interesting one to put on the list. Pablo Picasso, well-known artist in the 20th century, um, absolutely famous for the works of art that he produced, was also a serial sexual abuser and molester. He abused and harassed multiple women during his time. So absolutely fabulous in terms of the art that he created and the contribution to society that way, but then turned around and was terrible to women just across the board. Andrew Jackson, our seventh president, was the first populist president and really kind of was the first one to represent the entire society and the entire population. The first several presidents were all founding fathers and came from the aristocracy and were kind of representative of the ruling class or the elite class of the United States. And Andrew Jackson was the first one that was elected as a man of the people. So that's all well and good, but then he hated Indians, participated in the slaughter of Indians, oversaw the Indian Removal Act, which led to the Trail of Tears, which was the relocation of Indians from their native land, and they were forced to walk on their own, many who died of exposure, starvation. He was responsible for the deaths of thousands of Indians, while at the same time being a man of the American people, et cetera, et cetera. So not all good, not all bad. He did some great stuff. He did some absolutely terrible stuff. John Lennon. John Lennon is a musical genius. He was a peace activist in the 1960s. And, his song Imagine is one of those songs that's legendary and still has such a deep meaning even today. And it's a great thought and it's beautiful. Well, that's all well and good, but physically abused his wife, was terrible to his first wife, wound up divorcing her and marrying Yoko Ono, was terrible to his son that he had with his first wife, Julian Lennon, wouldn't speak to him, was abusive towards him, both mentally and physically. So, John Lennon was a great musician and contributed to society in some great ways, while simultaneously treating the people closest to him just absolutely terribly. It was wild. So, and then the last person on the list, I did a little bit different because I always found him fascinating. That's Pablo Escobar. So Pablo Escobar was a bad guy for sure. He was the most famous and most likely the wealthiest ever drug kingpin. And he kind of cornered the cocaine market in the 80s and was responsible for the vast majority of cocaine that came into the United States. At one point, he was so rich, he was spending $2,000 a month on rubber bands for his cash. He was bringing his network, his empire was bringing in so much cash, he had to buy $2,000 worth of rubber bands just to keep track of it all and organize it all in a way that he could store it somewhere. He was responsible for the murders of thousands of people. He murdered members of the Colombian government. He murdered members of the Colombian judiciary. He murdered rivals. He murdered people he thought were disloyal to him or were threats to him. He would kill people like changing his mind. While at the same time, he used a lot of that money to build hundreds, if not thousands of homes for the poor in Medellin, Colombia, and gave them the homes, gave them to them for free. Because he grew up in those same slums and he didn't like the way people had to live because he felt like the government wasn't taking care of them. So he took care of them himself. He built schools, he built soccer fields, he built baseball fields, all of which he did for free. Some of them had lights. You could play soccer at night and baseball at night. He paid for the electricity for the fields, while at the same time literally murdering thousands of people. So I always, that juxtaposition of Pablo Escobar doing such terrible stuff and such philanthropic stuff has always just been fascinating to me. So I included him in the list as well. So, in today's really polarized environment, I think it's really important to keep in mind that nobody is all good and nobody is all bad. I know there's tons of people that really hate former President Trump. You got to get past that hatred. I'm not saying you got to support the guy. I'm not saying you got to endorse the guy. But every single thing he does is terrible, is just false. He's got great family. He's got great kids, grandkids. If you've ever seen video of him spending time with his grandkids or with his supporters that are younger, that have disabilities, that have special needs, he's fabulous with those people. While at the same time, he can be a real dirtbag. I mean, paying porn stars to have sex with him and Trump University. There's no way that thing was just a grift. It absolutely was a grift. But he's not all bad. and he's certainly not all good the way his supporters want to make him out to be. And the same thing for the other side. Like I'm not a big fan of Tim Walz, but he clearly cares about his family. He clearly cares about his son. I think there's parts of his life where he does really good things. I disagree with him, and I think he's kind of a strange, creepy guy. But he's not all bad. I don't hate the guy. I'm just not a fan of his. So we've got to get past this thing where we hate and polarize and make everything a binary choice. It's either you love and support everything person X does, or you're not in our group, or you love or support everything person Y does, or you're not in our group. That's got to go away. We've got to quit thinking that way. And I would encourage everybody to think critically, look for good and look for bad. Don't deny the bad, and don't deny the good either. I think it's terribly important. It's the only way we're going to get past this kind of log jam that we've got where we can't talk to each other, or you can't associate with someone who is on the other side. It's just silly. It's got to stop. The people that support the side you don't support are not your enemy. They're your countrymen. They just think differently about the problems that we have, and think the solutions for the problems that we have are different than the solutions you support. We got to figure out how to keep that in mind and get back to a civil discourse so we can solve some of these problems. So hope that that's our episode for today. Hope you guys find that useful. I found it very interesting, kind of running down that list of people. Nobody's all good. Nobody's all bad. Make sure you keep that in mind, and make sure you keep an open mind. Don't judge other people. You are not the arbiter of who is good, who is evil, who is right, who is wrong. You get to make those decisions for yourself and for your own life. But I would tell you that the way I explain it to people is holding a grudge or hating someone, to me, is like drinking poison and expecting your enemy to die. The only person it affects is you. It makes you more negative. It makes you angry. It closes your mind. It stops you from thinking rationally. Just like if you drank poison, it would kill you, not your enemy. And you got to keep that in mind. It's not good for you. Figure out how to compartmentalize those things you dislike. Hang on to them. Not saying ignore them, but you can't let them run your life. And you can't just go through life just hating people. It's a bad way to go. It's a bad way to go. Hopefully that's useful. Thanks again for coming back and checking us out. Don't forget to go to our website, saltygingertalk.com. All of our podcast episodes are available there. We do a daily newsletter that you can subscribe to there, and links to all other social media accounts are there as well. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our video wherever, or our podcast if it's not video, wherever you consume our content. And we really appreciate your support. Everybody have a good week, and we will see you next time.